Want to bet? You can do it at Sports Interaction, Canada's sportsbook. The World Series may be over, but we still have a lot of football and hockey to talk about and bet on. Bet pre-game, live in play, or on one of our many prop bets. Made for Canadians by Canadians, Sports Interaction makes it easy to deposit, play, and cash out. Join now and see all sports betting has to offer. Head to sportsinteraction.com/SDPN. That's sportsinteraction.com/SDPN. Ontario only, 19 and over. Please play responsibly.
Seems like two GMs who come to mind when it comes to trade chatter. At least they're the more front-facing off of these meetings. Pierre Dorion with the Ottawa Senators and Mike Grier with the San Jose Sharks. Which one should we start with first? Are Pierre and the Sens and what they might be looking for, or are Mike Grier and San Jose with Erik Karlsson?
Well, let's jump in on Erik Karlsson. I mean, we're talking about, it was actually a player that Mike Grier described to us reporters as one of the three best offensive defensemen in the league in his view. Obviously having a great year this season, which we've touched on a few times. I think it's interesting that he acknowledged publicly that he would listen. I suppose if you're him, you might say, well, how is that news, guys? If you listen on everybody, right? I mean, you might get into some semantics there, but if there was ever to be a Karlsson trade, and that's still a big if, because of the price tag attached to him, he doesn't just have $11.5 million this year. It's for the next 4 years beyond this too, which, is, I'm not going to say, I actually don't believe it's immovable because of how well he's played, but I think it's a very difficult contract to contemplate trading, but the sides are going to need each other, right? Erik Karlsson has a full no move clause. So he's going to have to work with San Jose if they do look to move him on places he's willing to play, what the right fit might be. And I think ultimately they're going to have to retain perhaps even a significant amount of salary to make that trade work, or at least take back players or something to have the books be balanced. But I certainly think it's possible. We saw them work with Brent Burns and trading him to Carolina in the offseason. What Mike Grier said that didn't get as much attention was, I'm going to have these conversations with all my veteran players. He said, this is a former player that's jumped into this seat and clearly wants to, I don't know if it's a full rebuild or retool. I actually don't know what Mike Grier's true vision is, but he definitely wants to trade some veterans. And I think he wants to do right by the players because he understands what it's like to be a player. So I think they're going to be a very interesting team leading up to March 3rd. And if Erik Karlsson keeps playing well, maybe we get a blockbuster. I mean, I won't rule that out. I know that I'm in the minority because someone out there is going to say there's no way you can trade him at 11 million. But what happens if they get that down to 7 million? Just to throw out a number, and you look at how well he's performing. I think that there are teams out there that can at least talk themselves into it, even though there's clearly risk because of Erik's age and the injuries he's had. You just don't know if the next 4 seasons what they're going to look like for him.
That's very true. But hey, you know what? In the age of wanting to win now and getting yourself ready for the playoffs, maybe it is a worthwhile deal.
Wouldn't it be awesome if he could get traded back to Ottawa? I mean,
I thought about that.
I realize it's so unlikely, but he married a woman from Ottawa. He spends a lot of his offseason time there. I know he split last summer between Sweden and Ottawa, but he's got deep ties to the city. He wrote actually a really nice piece with the help of the Players Tribune about his relationship with Daniel Alfredsson. I mean, there would be a sort of storybook quality to seeing him back in a Senators sweater. I'm not sure it can work or will happen, but I mean, I try to look for places where it might make sense. Could he be a fit in Florida? They have some cap challenges, but there's maybe some ways to make that work. I mean, I'm trying to think of where he would want to go, where it lines up. There's only a handful of places is kind of the point. But the sentimentalist in me, we would love to see him back with the Senators at some point.
That would be cool. I wonder how involved they would be if they already deal with their hole on defense. We've been talking about the Senators being linked to a defenseman for months on end, it feels like.
Yeah, and they're still pursuing that. And, look, the Senators, it's not an easy trade for them to make. Right now they have Nikita Zaitsev, who they passed through waivers and has kind of been in limbo. They didn't send him to the American Hockey League, but he makes $4.5 million. He's basically not playing when everyone's healthy, at least. The one thing Pierre Dorion I thought was interesting in chatting with him a bit is he's of the view that maybe the solution is internal, that, they're really leaning on Jake Sanderson and Jacob Bernard Docker. Some of these guys, that younger players, and playing them more minutes than they ever get to play. And he kind of mused, like, you never know, you do that. And one of them really takes off, and you find your solution that, you don't give up assets for. Of course, the name I think that's more fair to connect them to is Jacob Chychrun, who's also still very much on the market. He's about to make his return from off-season surgery, play for the Coyotes. And this is a player that Senators have inquired on and had conversations on, but have balked at the price to this point. And so it's all starting to swirl if you see what's out there. And certainly Pierre Dorion didn't shy away from the fact that he's been very active in trying to make a move, because they've had some injuries, and I think they don't have enough talent right now on the back end to get to where they want to go to. But I think the Sens actually are a team that have probably, their record is worse than the way they've played. And so, I think it's worth them pursuing this, because I still think they could salvage something this season. I don't think they've dug too deep of a hole. And I actually think that the results suggest that they should be in for some more wins here coming up.
Are there any other teams circling in on Jacob Chychrun?
Not right now. I think what a lot of teams want to do is see him play, right? He's played about 6 minutes of ice time in 8 months or something. And so it's hard to, Arizona wants 2 first-round picks for Jacob Chychrun. I'm not saying they'll get that, but the point is this is a young, cost-controlled defenseman on a pretty good contract. And isn't that far removed from a big season. And so I think any team that wants to look at him wants to see him play and see what he looks like after these surgeries he's had. He's had a couple knee surgeries. I think he had a shoulder issue. He's had a wrist issue. So, he's dealt with a lot, even though he's a pretty young guy. But, I wonder about teams like Edmonton or Toronto, if he becomes an option for them when he gets back. But I think they've got to see him play. Like that's not reporting that they're banging down the door at this point, because I think everyone needs to know what version of him exists after, this long layoff and some of the injury problems he's had.
Hold on Toronto for a second, because I do have a question about them for this segment here. I'm also curious about the Calgary Flames. I know from training camp that they've wanted to get a top 9 or a top 6 forward. They tried with Sonny Milano. It did not work for them. Cody Eakin was brought in, maybe of a little lesser quality for what they would have wanted, but that did not work. Elliot Friedman was saying that they're still looking for a forward as of last weekend on his own show. Still seems as if Calgary is still looking, considering what's going on with them this season.
Well, yeah. And look, I would suspect that we're going to see that trade somewhere between now and March 3rd. The question is when, right? And that's hardly a bold prediction, but when you have a need that's that clearly identified, obviously the front office and scouting staff goes around the league and identifies all the potential targets. And, Brad Treliving makes his calls and sees if there's any fits anywhere. And, this can be a long process. But, it seems as though that is where Calgary is going to do its shopping. They, like basically the whole league, have only so much cap space to deal with. It's easier to make deals. Well, at least if you're out of LTI, as it gets closer to the deadline, because you accrue cap space as the season goes along. And so I think that there's a number of factors that play into that, but Calgary still feels it's one short, and let's see where it goes there. The funny thing about the Leafs, and because you said hold on Toronto, is the news in the last few days, of course, is that Jake Muzzin is very unlikely to return this year, dealing with a spinal injury. And we certainly wish him well on a personal level. The Leafs now have his cap space, in play. But I think there's going to be a debate when all is said and done. Do they use it on a forward themselves, or is it a straight defenseman? I mean, right now you'd say the odds probably are that they're a defenseman short of what they want to be, but they're a little bit like Ottawa in a sense. Now they have more minutes to give to Rasmus Sandin and Timothy Liljegren. They're using Jordy Ben as a depth option. I mean, maybe they find some grouping of players even without Muzzin that they like back there, and then they commit that cap space to bringing in another forward, because in recent years they haven't had the ability to bring in if you have a 5.625, which is the cap hit for Muzzin at the deadline in LTI, and you haven't used it, I mean, you could bring in a $10 or $11 million player with half retention, for example. Do you know anyone that fits that mold? I can't think of any right now. There might be a couple.
I think
guys in Chicago, at least, we're thinking about.
Yeah, Chicago kind of gets into my mind. I don't know why. I think of Chicago and deep dish pizza.
Right. But I think this is how I would encourage you to look at the Leafs situation, because a lot of my colleagues I've noticed, they announced this Muzzin news and everyone's like, all right, who are they trading for on D? It's like, I actually think, and the team started winning again too, right? Even without Muzzin, even without TJ Brody, who's injured right now. I think they have the luxury of waiting to see how their team comes together and then figuring out where they might have the best need, as it just gives them flexibility they don't usually have. And so I don't think you can rule out that they're in the market for a forward too. So I think the Leafs could go either way. Obviously, there could be a combination of players too. It doesn't mean you have to go spend it all on one player. Maybe you're bringing multiple players, but the deadline, I think we're going to have a kind of a crazy year for trades. It just, because nothing is happening now, which you would think is a bad thing, but I think it creates more pressure in the system. Like I think ultimately it's going to lead to more of a release, I guess, as we get into the new year. Because that was the one sense I got from talking to a number of the GMs after the meeting here in Toronto this week, is just a lot of them are having trouble getting anywhere with anything on trades right now. And we have some teams that are unexpectedly good, right? Some of the teams we might have thought could be sellers have had a strong start. You look at Seattle, all kinds. I mean, even Arizona, right? I'm not saying that they're going to be buyers, but they've had a better than expected start. Chicago's had a better than expected start. And so it's a long way of getting to the point that I think that this is going to be pretty interesting few months on the trade market once it gets heated up. It's not fully boiled yet. It's just starting to take shape with a meeting like this week's.
Friday, March 3rd. I hope you don't have too many plans for that day, because if it is as crazy as you say, I think we could be in for a really fun one.